Wow, there's loads of you. I've been sat right at the front all morning, kind of listening to Paul and thinking, how do you follow that up? And then there's Ruby Wax later, and there's kind of me in the middle. So along with the workshops, I'm some of the really sort of very, very practical stuff, I hope. And I hope that you all find the session useful. Do keep tweeting us. I think we're getting a bit of action on the hashtag. You can tweet me at Pooky H and the Charlie Waller Memorial Trust, who I work for, at Charlie W Trust. So the first thing I have to do, before I do anything else, whenever I'm talking to an audience of people who might not have met me before, is to explain my rather ridiculous name. Because when you have a name like Pooky, then yeah, people do tend to ask the question. Rather than answer it 500 times, I thought I'd just answer it the once. So, my name is Pooky. I'm named after a magical flying rabbit. Yeah. Yeah, my mum's favourite book was this one as a child, and yeah, no pressure there. And the astute amongst you will notice that not only is Pooky a small male rabbit, but also that my mum spelt my name wrong. Yeah, I followed on with the sort of literary tradition and called my first daughter Lyra, but I think that's rather kinder than Pooky. Could have gone with Noddy, but no. Anyhow, so I am Pooky. I'm the director at the Charlie Waller Memorial Trust. We do have a stand here today. Do go along and say hello to my colleagues Teresa and Izzy. The Charlie Waller Memorial Trust was set up after Charlie Waller sadly took his own life about 20 years ago this year. And we aim to promote knowledge about mental health so that people who might be in a similar situation to Charlie, that might not happen. His family felt his death was preventable, and we do our best to prevent further suicides and to raise awareness of mental health issues. We provide free training to schools and other organisations working with young people, and we sometimes work directly with young people themselves. We also have loads of resources, so big plug for the trust there. Do go and talk to colleagues on the stand and I'll tell you even more about it. I'm also the Vice Chair of the Children and Young People's Mental Health Coalition, which is a coalition of about 140 charities, and we basically try and come together and have one voice about children and young people's mental health across the UK. So when we're looking for things like policy change or trying to influence on the upcoming budget and things like that, we try and bring all those voices together. The other thing that I bring to the table is lived experience. Lived experience being the kind of, I don't know, professional term that we use for been there, done that, got the t-shirt, lived that shit. It's not great. I'm currently in a phased transition back to work, having had quite a period in hospital with another anorexia relapse. I struggle with self-harm, suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, all those things, and it's difficult. And you might find that today I'm around some of the time, and sometimes I will not be, because I'll need to go and take a bit of time to myself. So very much a phased transition. It's a part of my life that I'm very open and honest and happy to talk about, but I always do say to people that my story is just one, and that the ideas that I draw on today are drawn from the evidence base, they're drawn from experience of working with hundreds and thousands of young people, their teachers, the people who work with them, their parents, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's going to be a very, very practical session. I've got 4 practical strategies I'm going to share with you. When I spoke to the HeadStart organisers just recently and said, so what's the title of my talk? And Richard said to me, yeah, remember you decided the title, 4 practical strategies about. And I thought, wow, I must have had a really good idea when I came up with that. But here we are. So I'm going to go through them each in turn. So live it, they'll learn it. Bad feelings aren't bad. Talking about happy and healthy relationships, and then listening like you mean it. Some of these themes will be themes that you might have heard already touched on by Paul. Some of them will be reiterated later on in the day in the workshops and perhaps with Ruby. But what I'm hoping is that from this session you'll have some really tangible take-homes. You'll have some resources you might go and use. You'll have some ideas that feel like, yes, I can use this tomorrow. One thing to say is that there are lots of websites and things referred to in my slides. The slides will all be made available, won't they, Richard? Yeah, and I'll certainly tweet them as well. You're also welcome with these materials and any others that I share or that the Charlie Waller Memorial Trust ever share. You're always welcome to use those materials and adapt them for your own use as well. So starting off with live it, they'll learn it. Now, this is something that Paul did talk about. You can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself first. And obviously, that was the main focus for everything that Paul said, and this is absolutely vital. Before we start thinking about how we care for the young people who we might be parent to, we might be teacher to, we might be a youth leader to, we need to think first and foremost about our own well-being and also about the messages that we're sending. It's not always easy, though, because sometimes you might be having a bad day. This was a quote from someone I was working with recently in school. After many years in the classroom, I've learned that when it comes to the stuff that really matters, it's not what you say, but what you do that counts. It's a big responsibility being a role model on your bad days as well as your good ones, but it doesn't half-focus the mind. And that's the thing we have to remember, is that when we are in front of young people in any kind of leadership role, and again, this applies equally to parents as it does to teachers, as it does to support staff, as it does to youth workers, you name it, you become a role model. And it's not what you say and what you try and teach that often has the biggest impact. It's often what they see you do. So you just need to take a moment and stop and think, what are you actually teaching through the way in which you're conducting your sort of day-to-day life, whether that's in the classroom, the lunch hall, out on the playground, what you talk about from your personal life. What messages are you conveying? Because it's well, it's not easy, but it's much easier to teach a lesson on something than it is to actually live those values. Does that make sense? Yeah, so I did some consultation for the Government Equalities Office a while back about body image. And we had with us a group of, well, a whole range of people, sort of body image experts, lots of sort of academics, and then some teachers as well. And one teacher talked to me about how she had this aha moment one day because she taught this lesson that she felt was a really, really good lesson that had really hit home with her pupils about body image. And she thought that she'd really made a difference to how they maybe would perceive themselves and, you know, thinking a bit more broadly about self-esteem and diversity and that kind of thing. And then she found herself within half an hour in the lunch hall, and she was looking through all the different sandwiches, checking the calorie content, and made a passing comment to her colleague in the queue about how, you know, oh, whatever I eat, it just goes straight to my hips. And then she realized that one of the kids she'd just been teaching was stood behind her and heard this comment, and she just suddenly realised, I've just undone that whole lesson just in a flippant comment because I'm not living the values that I'm trying to teach. So, very, very simple example, but just, thinking about what are your pupils kind of observing you doing. And there are lots of different parts of our life that we need to think about with regards to this. So part of it's about just literally how we're looking after ourselves. Do we get enough sleep, like we ask our pupils to? Are we eating healthily? Do we get enough exercise? Is physical activity a part of our lives? Are we looking after ourselves physically? Because we all know that physical well-being underlies mental well-being. So, that's one of the things we should be thinking about in our own lives, as well as thinking about how our pupils can promote their own well-being. I realised I told them they didn't need to get rid of the table and I'm going to walk into it. The next one is about help seeking. So we, again, need to think about how do we role model help seeking? And when we think about help seeking at an event like this today, we are often thinking about how do we reach out for help and for support when things aren't going okay? If I'm struggling with a mental health issue, who do I talk to and how and what's going to happen next? But actually, we can role model help seeking even at a much more basic level than that. When we are working with young people and we show them that, you know what, sometimes I don't know the answer and so I look it up in a book or I ask a friend or we talk together as a class or I go to a trusted site on the internet, then we're showing them that, I help seek too, this is how we help seek. And that could just as equally be to do with not being able to solve a physics equation as it could be to do with needing support with my mental health. So we need to think, and this can happen right from a really young age, how do we, as the teacher, as the leader, as the adult, the trusted adult in a young person's life, how do we role model help seeking and show that that's okay, it's all right to ask for help? And then similarly, because help seeking is sometimes about admitting we don't know the answers, we should be thinking about how do we role model failure and problem solving? And that's something that as adults working with young people, we can do really badly because we sometimes feel like I've got to know all the answers. I'm here to teach, I'm here to lead. And it's the same kind of, role that, the likes of myself and Paul can fall into when we're on the stage like this. One of you might ask me a question later and sometimes I've got to say, I don't know the answer actually, or I've tried something and it didn't work. And we need to think about how we do that with our young people too, because again, otherwise they have this pressure to be constantly achieving, everything going okay, and we need to help them know that, do you know what, sometimes we don't manage first time, sometimes we climb and then we fall, but we get back up again. And that's the resilience that Paul was talking about earlier, but we need to role model that in what we're doing each day. And again, that can be with really, really simple stuff. That can be things like, actually, maybe I'm rubbish at football and the kids are playing football after school and I join in with them even though I can't kick a ball for toffee. Okay? It's about having a go at stuff and actually enjoying the process rather than only doing the things that we know we can do well. Making sense? Okay. Sorry, I'm a complete inability to read faces, so if it's rubbish, what I'm saying, like throw stuff, and if it's okay, then the odd nod and smile really kind of helps. And then we need to think about how are we modeling healthy coping strategies. Now, when we talk about healthy coping, again, we tend to be thinking directly straight back to unhealthy coping. So we're thinking about things like self-harm, which is in the headlines a lot at the moment. We're seeing a massive rise in the prevalence of self-harm. And we're often thinking about, well, that's an unhealthy coping mechanism. What healthy coping mechanism might we replace that with? And that's really important. But actually, scrub that, move forward a bit, and think, how do we instill healthy coping strategies in everybody? Because all of us need ways to manage, to stay healthy, to stay within what we call our window of tolerance. Now, I'm really proud of this slide, so I hope you like it. And if you don't, it would be really nice if you could pretend that you do. So I'd love to use, the science and the evidence base and try and turn it into kind of everyday speak that we can all understand. And I hope I will have achieved this here, because I love the idea of the window of tolerance, and I think that it makes it very, very easy to understand why we all need healthy coping strategies. So essentially, we all have this, window of tolerance, and we're kind of trying to stay within these two lines each and every day. And yeah, things undulate depending on what happens. So maybe you have a nice conversation with a friend in the break and a good cup of coffee, and you dip back down again and you're more towards the centre of your window of tolerance. Or maybe the queue for the toilet's really long and you're getting a bit anxious, and then you're maybe dipping back up out of the window of tolerance. So it goes up and down depending on what's going on, both in the very, very short term, but also in the medium and the long term too. So what happens when we go up out of our window of tolerance is we enter what's called hyper-arousal. That's our flight or fight reaction. And if that's sustained over a long period of time, that's when we begin to feel things like anxiety. When we're feeling that over kind of weeks and months, and it's really impacting on how we're able to manage our lives, then we might be diagnosed with anxiety. But this is something that some of us, may quite regularly feel. We go down through the bottom. It's the opposite. And we get hypo-arousal, and this is kind of our freeze reaction. And again, over a long period of time, this might be losing motivation, not being able to do anything, really struggling to get ourselves up and out, not having any joy in the things that we used to do before. So in the longer term, this is, more kind of low mood depression. But each of us, might dip in and out, and we're trying just to keep within that window of tolerance all the time. So our question is, how do we keep within that window of tolerance? How do we keep within that optimal zone? And it's fine to be going up and down a bit. We just want to avoid shooting up or down out of there. Does that make sense? Do you like the slide? Be honest, it's great, isn't it? So we need to think in terms of our role modelling. How do we role model to young people a wide variety of healthy coping strategies? Because actually, how I stay in that optimal zone is going to be completely different than how you do, or how you do, or how he does. It's different for all of us, and so sometimes we need to try lots of different things to find what works for us, and each of us needs to kind of have a toolkit that involves more than a bottle of wine, for me maybe self-harming or anorexia. We want to kind of move outside of that and think about different things. So some of the ones that work for me, and as I say, they'll be different for everyone. So for me, I've recently discovered climbing. This is just my favourite picture my kid took of me. So Lyra took this picture when I managed finally to conquer a very difficult climb. And again, this is this is a much healthier way for me of coping, because what I used to do would be either to run obsessively or to starve. You can't starve and climb at the same time. So for me, climbing is a much better way of coping than cutting or starving, for example. So that's one of mine. Another one is family time. And then the third one is many of us have a favourite four-legged friend, and in my case it's my buddy who comes most places with me. So it's different for everyone, and it's about finding our own. Some people love to colour, some people love to write, some people love art or music or sport, but we should be thinking about what are my healthy coping strategies, how am I role modelling good, healthy coping, and how can I encourage the young people in my care to embrace a range of strategies themselves too. Making sense so far? Thank you. Okay, so things you could try. So I've given, for each of the points I'm making, I've given you some suggested next steps, because I really hope that everyone will go away and try something. So maybe make a small change to improve your physical well-being, remembering the physical underpins the mental. Considering how best to stay within my window of tolerance, so that's that lovely, lovely slide. And then thinking about how do I step outside my comfort zone? So how do I do something that I might fail at, I might not achieve perfectly first time, and is that something I could do with my pupils? So the idea of, going and playing football with them if you're not good with them, maybe going climbing, because every time you go climbing, if you try a challenging route, then you will fall. So yeah, these are some suggestions. You may have some of your own as well. Okay, a few resources as well. So I've highlighted resources in each section. So first of all, a shout out to the Education Support Partnership. I believe they're here today. They are like a secret society. I often ask who's heard of them, and people haven't, but they're wonderful. Do look up their website. If you're a teacher, then they provide qualified counsellors to support you on your teaching journey, and heck knows, we often need that. And then mediasmartuk.com has resources for working with young people to support them in becoming more critical consumers of the media around them. Okay, next we're thinking about bad feelings aren't bad. And again, this was something that Paul talked about when he spoke earlier. And he said that there wasn't any such thing as bad feelings. He said something really succinct. What was it? It was something about our feelings are valid for us right now, essentially. Whatever you're feeling, right now, it's valid for you. So I'm going with bad feelings that aren't bad, because actually we see so many headlines at the moment which are, massively overplaying the, how many young people are suffering with depression, for example. And actually, one of the things we absolutely need to understand is that we all experience a range of emotions, and actually that's okay. And sometimes we're not happy, and that's transient. And that doesn't mean that we have a mental health issue. And so actually, whilst normally I'm always talking about mental health issues, today I'm talking about sometimes it's not a mental health issue, sometimes it's a bad day. So bad feelings aren't bad, or rather bad feelings aren't all bad. Some bad feelings can feel pretty bad. And actually, when we need to worry, just so that you're aware, we're looking for impact and longevity. So if a young person is experiencing something which feels bad, they're experiencing bad, difficult feelings, and they are lasting for a period of weeks, and they are having a significant impact on that young person's ability to engage with their normal life, that's when we have a problem that will need further support and maybe a diagnosable mental health issue. A day, 2 days, a week, that's not a mental health issue, that's life. So it's normal to experience a range of emotions, and it's really, really important in our role working with young people that we help young people to understand that it's normal not to feel happy all the time, and also to help them to kind of name those feelings. So I always find this to be a really helpful way of understanding it. So, you plan to go on a straight line from start to finish, but actually the reality is very different. Life tends not to be a straight line. We tend to have stuff that happens along the way that makes it difficult. So, this might be a relationship breakdown. This might be I've done really badly on a maths test. This one might be that the argument that I had with a friend earlier. It can be anything. It might be small things. It might be big things. But inevitably in life, we do have things which upset the apple cart as we work our way along. And what really matters is how we respond to and deal with those, and how we understand those feelings. So, to really just make the point again. So it's normal not to feel happy all the time, and this is what we need to help young people to understand. And also the thing that we need to be reminded of ourselves sometimes. Looking back to this slide, I was talking with colleagues earlier about how I really struggled during Eating Disorders Awareness Week, because as someone who has suffered with anorexia on and off for many years, what happens in Eating Disorders Awareness Week are there are lots of very, very idealized stories of recovery shared, and they look very much like the top line, and there's me in the bottom line, probably, you know, not even managing to stand on the boat, but kind of sort of struggling along somewhere, and I feel like, oh, well, I'm not doing this well enough. And so actually, even as the adults, we need to remind ourselves this. It's not normal not to have any difficulties on the path. So the things we need to think about when working with young people, first of all, it's a lot easier to work with something when you have a name for it. So right from early on, we need to help young people to name their feelings. We need to think about how we talk about them. We need to give them the language, and that's one of the best gifts that we can give to young people, particularly, you know, from early on, is the ability to name, to understand and to vocalize how they're feeling. It's very, very difficult to ask for help with something or to explore something if you don't know what it's called, right? So we need to name those feelings. Sometimes, depending on the age and the stage of the young people that we're working with, we might ascribe them colors or animals, or, you know, we can be really imaginative about that, but we want to have something tangible that we can use in order to refer to these different feelings. Sometimes as well, using things like a scale can be really helpful. So again, as Paul said, his scale of 1 to 10, and that can help us to understand how we're going on that journey, how we're moving within that window of tolerance, and when things are perhaps getting to a point when we really need to take some different steps to change the path. We also need to help young people understand the physical responses that our body might have to different emotions. So they need to understand things like the physical manifestation of panic and anxiety, because what can happen sometimes, if we don't understand what's happening in our body and why, that can make us panic more. And lots of young people, or people of any age, who struggle with panic disorder will actually get to the point where they panic about the panic, and it becomes a very, very difficult cycle to come out of. But what we can do, if we're able to teach them the basics of, well, actually, physiologically, this is what's happening and why, and most importantly, when your body hits that flight or fight response, that it can only last for a certain period of time, because your heart can't beat that fast for that long. You can't sustain that physical response, and it will eventually drop off if you can just sit with it. It's a really important thing to understand. So actually talking to young people about how feelings feel. We need to talk to them about how to become critical consumers. So I've mentioned this a couple of times already, but being aware that what we see around us is what people want us to see. And we used to just talk about the media and adverts and how, you know, models were airbrushed, and that we had an unrealistic representation in terms of celebrity, really. But these days, it's not just about celebrity, it's about every single person in the room, every single person we come into contact with. You know, if I look through my friends' Instagram or Twitter or Facebook feeds, I don't see their life warts and all. I see their life as they've chosen to represent it. I see the airbrushed version. And for most people, that's an idealized version, and that can make me feel like I'm not living as good a life as them. And we need to help young people, and again, bear it in mind for ourselves, to understand that we are observing what others want us to see. So we need to become critical consumers, to understand that people don't just airbrush their photographs, they airbrush their lives as well. And then finally, we need to help young people know when to seek support. So remember, this is when they are having difficult feelings which are lasting for a long period of time, period of several weeks or more, and when they're really having an impact on their ability to engage in their day-to-day life. They don't just need to know when to seek support. Of course, we need to explain where they can get that support and what will happen if they do. So things you could do. So consider how things like emotional literacy are addressed in your PSHE program. Thinking about how you role model your own feelings. Do you talk about your feelings with the young people in your care? How comfortable would you feel doing that? And if you don't feel comfortable doing it, how would you expect them to be comfortable talking to you or to each other? Just a question there. And then also, how can we support our pupils in becoming more critical consumers? So again, the Media Smart link that I showed before is very good in terms of that sort of becoming more critical consumers, but we can do it in everything. We actually just need to become, you know, more of a nation of question askers. We should always be interrogating what's presented in front of us and thinking, why is it being shown in this way and why? What message is this person trying to convey? Okay, so some suggested resources, and again, you'll get access to all these slides, so don't feel you have to frantically write it all down. The Samaritans have put together some wonderful resources, and their developing emotional awareness and listening resources are very good. They're huge. You might want to cherry pick, but if you want to work with young people in a sort of educational, quasi-educational setting, then they're quite good resources to draw on. Then the PSHE Association guidance on mental health. There are a series of lesson plans for primary and for secondary, and then long guidance on how to teach about mental health issues and emotional well-being in a safe way. I have to promote them and say they're wonderful because I wrote them. But we have had genuinely really positive feedback on them. So there's some good starting points there. This is a paid-for resource, but one that I have found to be really useful, working with a whole range of different young people, and particularly those who find it difficult to discuss their emotions. So these are literally just, they're kind of cards about this size, and you can write on them with a dry marker pen. And they're just a series of emojis, and they were developed by a lady called Natasha, who used a version with young people that she was working with. And she just found that these were young people who could communicate through emojis in a way that they couldn't communicate through other means. And so she developed the cards. And yeah, as I say, I find them to be a really good resource with kids of all ages. It's surprising how much can come out of a conversation that was not going anywhere otherwise. So a really good way of expressing a range of emotions. And then, so I can see Richard's trying to take a picture. Ta-da! I hope Natasha puts the fiver in the post. And then a couple of books that you might find interesting are, so Help, I've got an alarm bell going off in my head. This is a really fantastic book for helping to explain anxiety and how it kind of manifests itself physically. And then All Birds Have Anxiety is a beautiful book, but it also helps us to understand what anxiety kind of looks like. So helping to understand and put these feelings into a way that we can talk about and address them. So a couple of nice resources there. And then the other thing you might want to do, so we have 21 webinars, which you can get to from the Charlie Waller Memorial Trust site, and session 15 is specifically about managing overwhelming feelings. So we've got recordings of those and slides you can download, and I'll refer to a couple more later on, but hopefully that might be a useful one if you want to do a bit more learning on that. Okay, point 3. God, I'm determined to walk into everything. So point 3 is happy, healthy relationships. And you might kind of wonder, why is this in here? How does this sit in the context of everything else? And actually, I think it's almost the most important thing that we can have at all. So when we think about our 5 ways to well-being, one of them is connect. And it's really important that we think about what that actually looks like. So we need to have a range of different relationships in our life, and it's from that we're able to form that kind of safe base. So thinking right back to our kind of Bowlby and our attachment theory, this doesn't go away. We all need a kind of safe base from which we feel we can explore the world, and that's true for ourselves as well as the young people that we're working with. And those are relationships between friends, between siblings, with parents, with other trusted adults. It might be with professionals. But we need to know what a healthy relationship looks like and what an unhealthy relationship looks like in order to be able to ensure that we have good, healthy relationships that form that safe base for us. So the kind of questions that we should be helping young people to explore is, first of all, who's in my network? And this can be a really lovely exercise to do, because sometimes we can feel really alone. And actually, when we stop and we think, well, who are the people that I interact with every day? You know, who are the people that I come across? Who are my friends? Who do I socialize with? Who do I do different activities with? Who could I turn to if I needed someone to talk to? And actually think about that network. That can be a really helpful question. Good question for us to ask ourselves as well. And if we find there are gaps in a child's network, we might be thinking, well, what can we do to help address that? Because not every child is blessed with having the full network of relationships that they might want or need. Another thing just to mention in passing, and I could wax lyrical about this all day, is online as well as offline relationships. So any time that we're talking about really anything, but in particularly talking about developing healthy relationships, we need to think about the online as well as the offline world. What we find is that young people now don't differentiate in the same way that we might do. Actually, increasingly, we're the same. There are lots of people who I'm meeting today for the first time, having known them for a long time on Twitter, and they don't feel any less a part of my network than people that I might have met many times face to face. We feel like we know each other. And it's the same for kids, but they need to know, what does a safe and healthy relationship online look like, just as important as knowing what a safe and healthy relationship looks like offline. And that's both because it can help us to take advantage of the many benefits of the online world, as well as keeping us safe from the potential pitfalls. One of the nice things about the online world is that if you don't feel like you fit, you can find your tribe. The online world is massive. So I remember I discovered Twitter when I first became a mum, and I felt very lonely. I live in Croydon, and I basically tried to go to these kind of mother and baby groups, and I had the choice of mother and baby groups with the Surrey mums, who were the kind of mums who were dressed head to toe in Bowden, and so was their child, and they matched. And the only way in which I matched my child was because everything was covered in vomit on me, and everything was covered in vomit on her. And then there were the the Croydon mums, and it's meant with no disrespect, but they were a lot younger than me. They'd had a very different kind of upbringing, and I just didn't really fit with either. But what I found was when I went online, I was able to find my tribe, and that was how I discovered social networking, and the rest is history. So then the next question, which came up, and I just whittled on, ignoring it. What is normal? This is probably the one I should have put at the top of the list. This is so important. Young people only have their own experience to make assumptions about what is normal, okay? So if they are coming from, for example, an abusive relationship at home, they may not recognize that as an abusive relationship because they might not have experienced living in someone else's house, so they don't know that that's not okay. Okay, so we need to help them understand what's normal and what's not normal, and what we should be able to expect from relationships, and what to do if we are not experiencing that. Pornography, I mentioned briefly, just because, gotta love a bit of porn. No. When I worked at the PSHE Association, I always ended up tackling the topics that no one else felt comfortable talking about. So, pornography, FGM, these were all my go-tos. But no, pornography is important to mention when we're thinking about healthy relationships, because a lot of young people's first access to their understanding about sexual relationships and intimate relationships comes via pornography now. Kids are watching it younger and younger, and the kinds of relationships they are watching in pornography doesn't represent real life. There is a real lack of consent going on there, and what we find is that we see a lot of abuse within teenage relationships, and when we talk to the young people involved, they don't even realize that this is a problem. They've seen it on screen, they've seen it on their computers, they think this is how we conduct relationships, so we actually need to tackle this head on. And then finally, how to be a good friend. And one of the reasons why I always highlight this is because we need to teach young people that to be a good friend, sometimes we have to do something that doesn't feel quite right. So it might be that we're worried about a friend and we feel that we need to tell a teacher. Say, for example, our friend was self-harming and they don't want us to tell anyone. We might think, do you know what, my friend really, really needs support right now. So sometimes we have to do the thing that in the short term might make us unpopular with our friend, but in the long term will enable that friend to get the help they need. So we need to think about what being a good friend really means. So things you could do: teach your pupils to give and receive informed consent. Consider online connections as friend as well as foe. So forget that, everything about the internet being toxic and poisonous. Think about the positives there too. And then signpost how, when, and why to seek support. A few resources for you. So Childline is a really great place for people to seek support if they don't feel yet ready to have that kind of face-to-face conversation. You can talk to them online or on the phone. They're also very good at coming into school and talking about healthy relationships and abuse, and lots of schools that I've worked with have talked about how that assembly's had a real impact on how their children talk and behave, and often can also result in disclosures too, which is a good thing. Sometimes people feel that when we teach about stuff and then we get disclosures that's a bad thing, but it's a really positive thing. A young person who felt unable to speak up before now feels unable to speak up. In my world, that's always a good thing. Then we have the PSHE Association guidance, teaching about consent in key stages 3 and 4, but actually there's much that can be learned from this that can be extrapolated across to younger ages as well. Because when we're teaching about the giving and receiving of consent, we're not just talking about sex, we're talking about everything here. So we can be thinking right down to kids of 4 and 5 and how they share toys and that kind of thing. It's something we can build up right from the start. And then if we are thinking more about sort of sexual consent and teenage relationships, Nick Luxmore is one of my favourite authors for kind of really good, practical, suggested advice. So he's worked as a counsellor and a teacher for many years. And this one draws on many, many, many conversations with young people about the tough stuff around sex. Okay, finally, listen like you mean it. Now, I spoke at a conference a couple of weeks ago that we organised in Reading, at Reading University, and that really, really, really irritating thing happened of where I come along and I think that I have some important stuff to say and I'm the professional, and then this young person came along and she did a much better job of saying everything I wanted to say. But actually, what she said was, she was very, very clear that actually it doesn't matter. You don't need to know anything about mental health. You don't need to know anything about the various different difficulties that are going on in a young person's life in order to listen. She said, just listen. It's the most important thing that you can do. And I think she was the kind of real standout that day, and we all went away with the message, just listen. And if you do go away with just one message from what I say today, I think, again, just listen is so important. And it's important when we're listening that we think about a few different things so we can become better listeners. So one of them is to embrace the silence, which always feels like a very ironic kind of thing for me to say when I've just been stood here talking at you for the last half an hour. But this is because this is very true. When you are sat with a young person and they want to talk about something, or perhaps they're reaching a point of readiness to talk about something, it might not be fully formed in their head yet. They may never have said these words aloud before. They might not have quite the right words. They might be really worrying about what are you going to think or what's going to happen next as a result of this. But also their head might just be such a jumble that it's really, really hard to get it in order. So whilst you're sitting in a silent room going, oh God, this is awkward, shall I fill the silence? What they're thinking is, or something along those lines. And so sometimes we just need to as Paul would say, shut up. and now allow them a bit of space, allow their thoughts to settle, and let them do the talking. This is a fun game I also play with my therapist. It's called Who Can Be Silent the Longest, and I nearly always win. And then I remember how much it costs, and then I start talking. Stupidest game ever, Pooky, stop it. Next one, don't guess. Always allow the person who you're listening to tell their story. You might think you know what they're going to say to you. You might have ideas about what's impacting on them, but actually the only person who really knows is them, so let them tell you. Don't put words in their mouth. Focus. So when I'm listening to a young person, phone off, computer off, no disturb sign on the door, whatever it might take, I want them to know that right now it's just about me and them. I'm listening to them. Nothing else in my world matters right now. It doesn't have to be for very long. And this is one of the really interesting things I found when I talk to young people, particularly those who've been through a really difficult time and they reflect back on the moment when things changed. And some of them, it will have been a 4 or 5 minute conversation with a teaching assistant, but it will be a teaching assistant who just stopped, dropped everything, and for just 5 minutes, they really, really cared about that young person, and it made a difference. So just for that few minutes, just focus. And it's fine to say, do you know what, I've only got 5 minutes, but be honest about that. But just that as long as you've got, you make them your primary focus. Next one is not to judge. Young people talk about this all the time. They really hate it when they start talking about what's happening with them, the things they're going through. They worry about what you're thinking about them. And so sometimes we need to be reassuring that we're not judging them, but we need to be really, really careful that we aren't placing any judgment. And that can be hard. When a young person that you care about starts talking to you about difficult things that are going on for them, or maybe the fact that they're self-harming, or maybe they're binging, or someone's been hurting them, or whatever it might be, it can be really, really, really hard not to allow our thoughts about whatever's going on with that young person to get in the way of them telling the story. But actually at this point we need to withhold all of our judgments and just let them tell that story. This is their time to share. And then finally, and this can be a really tough one, don't rescue. You are not going to be able to immediately make everything okay for this young person. And that's okay. They don't actually want you to. They might like you to support them in working out what the next steps are. They might like you to help them work out who to talk to next, or think about some practical ideas to make tomorrow feel a little bit easier. but they don't expect to come along and have one conversation with you and, hey, presto, everything's okay. I mean, that'd be lovely, but it's just not realistic. And so we need to not turn into the St. Bernard with the whiskey around his neck or whatever, because our instinct can often be to scoop up and try and make everything feel okay. What we need to do is acknowledge, this must have been a really tough conversation. Thank you so much for trusting me. I'm going to do everything I can to support you, and together we're going to think about what to do next, okay? Rather than, I can fix this for you, because sadly, in most instances, you can't. It's not a cut knee. So, a few things you could do to follow up. Watch a webinar about listening skills. I'll suggest one in a moment. Make a moment for a child causing concern. Have a think about whether there is a young person in your life at the moment who could do with 5 minutes of your time, just 5. Is there a young person who you think needs to be heard? Make that 5 minutes and just listen. And then maybe forgive yourself for not knowing all the answers, because along with not being able to rescue is that fallibility. Actually, I can't fix this, but I can support this young person to tread what might be quite a difficult path. Another Nick Luxmore book, so Essential Listening Skills for Busy School Staff. This is a very short book. It acknowledges that we're all very busy, but actually it's got very, very good strategies for making the most of what little time that you actually do have in supporting young people through listening. A couple of webinars that you might find helpful, again, in the same place on the Charlie Waller Memorial Trust site. So one is about handling disclosures, so how to do that safely and sensitively, and then again, listening in a way that makes children feel heard and supported, so a slightly longer-winded thing than one slide. Okay, so my 4 points. Live it, they'll learn it. Try and be a good role model, and a good role model doesn't necessarily mean a perfect one. Remembering that bad feelings aren't all bad. We all have our ups and downs. We want to be thinking about, what does a happy and healthy relationship look like, and what does it not look like? And then finally, and probably most importantly, listening like you mean it. I always like to end with a quote from a young person, and this is one that I thought was really suitable for today. Of course, I didn't appreciate at the time quite what an impact Mr. Greensmith would have on my life. He taught me how to read and count, but more than that, he taught me that I mattered, that it was okay not to be okay, and that if I asked for help, he would gladly give it. He saw me as a person worth caring about, and then so did I. And you all have the capacity to be that person in a young person's life. Often you already will have done it and you might not even know. But this is why we do the things that we do. I have a couple of plugs after my thank you slide, so I would just share those first. So one is that when I was in hospital, I was trying to keep my brain occupied, and one of the things I did was put together a series of cards which are designed to reach out to people when they're in hospital or going through a difficult time in their life. You can buy these cards in packs from the Charlie Waller Memorial Trust stand. All the costs have been covered, so they have suggested donations on them, but you can pay what you like, and all the money will go directly to the Children and Young People's Programme at the Trust. And then if you'd like to make a donation directly via text, you can do that too. Yeah, do come and talk to us on our stand, and I hope that was helpful.